welcome to another episode of The Land of Saints and Sinners. Today we have Clark.
Hello.
And myself, Jojo.
As you rang and said that you were going to be doing your podcast yesterday, and as you started, and obviously your phones were off, I'm like going, oh my God, I've just found this that was released by Sky, that news article on how the English and Welsh government will not be following through on the compensation scheme that was one of the recommendations in the IICSA, the Independent Inquiry into Historic Child Sexual Abuse. And it was, wow, you're talking about what Lucy Powell's saying. This is exactly like the child sexual abuse scandal, the grooming gang scandal.
Yeah,
and you really should know about it.
Absolutely. And we know what they say, that actually the art of deflection is distraction, you know, is a very, very good, you know, way to keep our mind over here when actually we should be focusing on what they're actually doing here. So, you know, the very fact that these victims, and let me tell you, when these victims have gone what they've gone through, you know, to be able to have compensation, not to restore anything that they've lost, you know, in the abuse, but as something to actually say, this is what you've suffered, and actually we're going to help, you know, sort of redress for the rest of your life, that you have a little bit of comfortable and a little bit of solace.
I think one of the worst things about it is that the victims were promised that they were going to get something, right? So they weren't. There was a lot of criticism of the IICSA report. You know, let's not forget that there was a lot of criticism of it.
Who was criticising it?
The victims.
Okay.
So they were criticising it. It didn't go far enough. It didn't sort of like cover a lot of the aspects that they wanted to come out. The report came out on the back of historic child sexual abuse, like the Jimmy Savile affair, and also things like the boarding schools and scouts and things like that. That's what the inquiry was set up to do.
So Conservatives set it up. Theresa May was the Home Secretary, and she actually sort of went through this to kind of instigate something, didn't she?
So if you remember back to when the Jimmy Savile scandal broke, and how it looked into how people in positions of authority in the media and in politics and so forth, positions of power, had abused that power. There was a huge media backlash. There was a huge public outcry on the back of it. And Theresa May acted upon that by setting up an independent inquiry into those allegations, what happened, what went wrong, and how we could avoid it going forward in the future. And it was a big inquiry. And it took a lot of guises as well whilst they got the inquiry set up and going. And in the end, they ended up setting it up under the Inquiries Act, which is an act of Parliament, so as it could compel people to come and give evidence, because people were hiding behind the fact that it wasn't a judicial inquiry, therefore they didn't have to give evidence. So they changed that, and it went through a number of chairmen and chairwomen, and then this inquiry cost £186 million.
So you want to know where they're spending our money?
So it was a long inquiry. You know, 2014, I think it started. 2012, 2013 was when Jimmy Savile things broke. 2014, Theresa May set the inquiry up, I think. I might be wrong, but it was roughly around about then. And the final bit of the report didn't get written until 2022, and then commented upon by the current Conservative, the then current Conservative government in 2023.
So let's talk about this. So Labour have now taken over from what Conservatives had set up.
Yeah.
So Theresa May actually
started the ball rolling.
Yeah, but I think actually looking back, and I don't know if you feel the same, Theresa May has been actually given a lot of flack for just basically her face didn't fit. You know, she wasn't like the best speaker. She wasn't like the best kind of face, you know, but looking back, I think actually seeing what she did and what she implemented, I've actually got a lot more love for her. And I think that she did a lot to help a lot of people.
I think the one thing that she did do, and you can't deny that, is she acted upon the sentiment of the public. So she heard what was going on and set the inquiry up. She set the ball rolling. It was going to be a big inquiry. No one, you know, you couldn't predict then what was then going to happen with Boris and the way that the Conservative Party and the Conservative government all fell apart, Cameron and all of those kind of things. Because remember, since she set that up, we've had COVID, the plandemic, as we like to call it.
The pandemic.
We've had, banking crises. We've had, just absolute shambles and chaos going on. And the government's changed and prime ministers changed. I mean, we went through like prime ministers, so they were going out of fashion, didn't we, under one period?
Yeah.
But all the while, this inquiry was going on in the background.
Yeah.
And it was it's a big piece of work. It really was. I mean, it cost 186 million quid, but it's a lot of money. And when it finally got produced and when the outcomes came out, yes, there was criticism of it, but the government at the time in 2023 said that they were going to look at the inquiry, look at the recommendations, and look about putting in place a plan to implement the recommendations from it.
Here begs the question, why, are we having to have an inquiry? Why is there not a governing body that's already looking after the particular, sort of sectors, instead of having to get to this point of spending 180 million?
That was one of the recommendations from the report, was that there should be a body that looks at these child sexual abuse or sexual abuse cases and have an actual government department with a government minister overlooking and overseeing these things to ensure that justice is given and the perpetrators are brought to account. And that's something that I think now Jess Phillips that's the role that she served. So
186
million.
6 million. I mean, that's a staggering amount when what we could have done, is kind of had, like we have Ofsted for schools.
Yeah.
Why are we not having a governing body making sure that the people are looking after, the people who are going into care, into the social services, whether they're going into, nunneries, or convent schools. Yeah.
So what you're saying, there should be a department that looks into these allegations of child sexual abuse, like we just had, didn't we, with the Archbishop of Canterbury? Those allegations came out. The Archbishop of Canterbury resigned on the back of it because he could have acted and should have acted sooner on the information that he gave. Well, that was one of the recommendations of the IICSA.
Recommendation is not good enough after.
No, it isn't. But again, it's one of those things where you'd rather have an outcome that is acted upon. So if you're going to have an inquiry, you've got to have recommendations that are going to be implemented, that you're going to look at and go, do you know what? That's exactly what we need. And like you've just come out and said it makes common sense that there should be a department there that looks at the victims of sexual abuse and child sexual abuse to ensure that they get justice, that these allegations don't get rolled over and the victims get forgotten and the perpetrators are brought to account.
Okay, then we have a whole different sort of setup. Like if you go to the police, you're barely believed. So you have like this kind of system that's set up for victims, to be able to go forth and say, okay, Mr. Officer, this is what's happened to me. Like, this is like, it's taken me 10 years to come forward because I've been completely traumatized, and quite frankly, you have some children that come forward straight away and say it, and then the adults don't believe them. So then you've got the adults that don't believe the children. Then you've got the people that actually have taken time to actually come forward. That some people take 40 to 50 years and are in their 70s before they speak up. And so what my question is, right, is when you have the police, you're going to the police and then they don't believe you, but then they're asking for people to go and be set up anyway. None of this the system does not work.
And I think this is what this department needs to do is to look at the allegations that are made, and if they see and one of the recommendations was as well that all instances of abuse that get reported and get reported to statutory bodies, there's a register of. So therefore, if someone turns around and says, do you know what, Jimmy Savile was abusing me, it goes in the register. Then all of a sudden, 2-3 years later, someone else comes forward and says, Jimmy Savile abused me. And there's a pattern then coming. So these people are coming forward independently. Then it's looked at and gone, do you know what, there's quite a few now for this person. It could be a scout troop, it could be a football coach, because we've seen it in football coaches, could be a church group, it could be anything. But I think this is what this register that's set up with a department that holds that information will look at and then go, do you know what, we need to act upon this, we need to do an investigation upon it.
So now we're going to look at, so Theresa May's implemented it, we've had that all set up, and now Labour.
Well, Theresa May started the inquiry.
Yep.
By the time that the inquiry finished, Theresa May had been and gone, and many other guys as ministers. And now we're at the point where the Conservative government had the report, said they were going to look at implementing the findings. So they were going to look at how do they structure that, the implementation of the findings. And that was one of the things that they were going to do. But they never actually got round to implementing it. And to a certain extent, I can understand a little bit why, because it would be a massive piece of work to create a department, to do the things and put in place the whole structure, policies, process and procedures to implement all of those recommendations. It's not impossible to do. There has to be a will to do it. But I can understand what they said. We've taken on board the findings. We're going to look at how do we implement them and how do we get it on board. By the time that they got round potentially to doing it, there was a general election back in June, July last year, where they were then taken out of power and the Labour government under Keir Starmer was brought in. And now you have Yvette Cooper as the Home Secretary, and you have Jess Phillips, who is the Secretariat for Women and Children. And so in part, that Jess Phillips role has been taken as part of that inquiry as one of the recommendations. So that's now in place.
But they've stopped it. They're now.
Yes. And this is where we go back to the victims. When we say about victims redress, how do they feel now? They were promised something that they were going to get, that this inquiry was going to be acted upon and the recommendations were going to be acted upon. And in February of this year, the government, this current government, under Starmer, Yvette Cooper and Jess Phillips, said they would implement, and I think they even said it during the manifesto and during the whole campaigning. And
February.
And in February they turned around, this is what we're going to do.
This is how we're going to do it. We're going to care for, we're going to look after, we're going to redress, make sure everybody's looked after. And now they've changed their mind and said,
this is what got sneaked out yesterday, that they're going to shelve the plans for the compensation.
Again, when I've talked about my counselling, and I've looked after people who are rape victims or have gone through abuse or sexual abuse or even violent abuse, to go through that and to not be heard or listened to is the most devastating kind of mental fuck up you can ever go through. And when you're going through that and you are not taken seriously for the rest of your days, you are silenced at some point. You feel that your words are actually fruitless, like nobody's going to listen to you, and that is the most painful thing on this planet.
I think it's absolutely horrific. It's abhorrent the way that victims are being treated here, because they were told they were going to get something. Now, how are they feeling now when they're turning around and saying, we were going to do this, we were going to implement this, and do you know what? It's going to cost too much, so we'd rather spend the money elsewhere. You're not important enough to have this money spent on you. And I think if I was a victim, I would be absolutely fuming. I would feel worthless. You're already feeling worthless enough because of the things that you've gone through. To then be told by the government who've used you as a political pawn. They've used you to make themselves look good and look at us.
They have elevated themselves for power to look like they are protecting people, but what they have actually done is done a huge U-turn and absolutely damaged these people that they've made promises to. Keir Starmer, you're a piece of shit.
Such a wanker, right? He comes out with, the previous government didn't implement it. And he turned around and was really hammering it home in the House of the Parliament, in Prime Minister's question times. He was really, really hammering home the point that the Tories did nothing about it and that they were going to act upon it. And now he does this.
Okay, so the reason why I'm calling him a piece of shit is because actually I have a question, Clark, which is, I think, really quite pertinent. So they are taking this amount of money away from victims, but where are they actually putting that money? What are they taking it from to put it to?
Over the last few years, they've spent £3 billion on private companies in order to manage the migrant crisis, stop the boats, smash the gangs, and all of those rhetoric sayings that they're coming out with now. They've spent over £3 billion.
Smash the gangs! Oh my God, what are you actually doing here? You're just all mouth.
So yeah, they're giving money to other people. They're giving. What was it? We saw they're spending £500 million to farmers abroad, and I think they're spending £80 million for farms in Uganda to make them more, I don't know what, more.
Uganda?
Yeah.
Why are we sending money to Uganda when we have victims here in England who have suffered at the hands of whomever, but they need redress?
It's about choices again. It's about the choices, and that's where it must really be damaging for people to turn around and go, hang on a minute, I've lived here all my life, I put up with all this abuse, I'm probably costing an absolute fortune to the NHS and maybe disability benefits because of the psychological trauma that I'm going through, that I can't work, medication that I need, the therapies that I need.
PTSD, it comes with it hand in hand.
Thousands of victims out there, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of victims out there that are costing us absolute fortunes on the NHS.
So Keir Starmer is the most hated Prime Minister in the whole of time. Do you not agree?
That takes some doing, but no, I completely agree. I think absolutely the worst Prime Minister in my memory.
The amount of hatred that we've had on our posts for Keir, just saying he is the most despicable, despised, revolting man, leave the country because when he steps down or he's pushed out of being Prime Minister, we will not tolerate him.
I think the other thing as well is we're beginning to hear rumblings in the background now, aren't we, of dissent. There's a few more MPs coming out and saying they're not happy the way that they cut benefits, PIP payments. I think there was something else that I put out the other day, and it was from 2019, where there was so many people that were making political capital about how the Tories' austerity was cutting the benefits, forcing, they were trying to force disabled people into work. And at the time when they were in opposition, Starmer and his minions were coming out and they were absolutely hammering the government at the time for the actions that they took. And we're all very lucky to be where we are at the moment, and we're only seconds away, minutes away from a life-changing event in which we're going to need that help and support. And they took it away. They took that safety net away previously, and the Labour Party used to be the voice for the downtrodden and the poor, and stop them from being abused in that way. And they've come into power and they've gone completely back on that. And they've gone completely away from their values. They have become an extension of the previous government.
Absolutely.
There's no, in fact, they're even worse than the previous government. You didn't think that could get any worse. You really couldn't think that could get any worse. And now they are worse. And I think it's the lies and the rapidity of how they've changed their tune.
Exactly. So for me, like the 2030 agenda, which we all know about, and if you don't know about it, it's really important to research the Great Reset, the 2030 agenda. What I feel like they're doing, they're trying to expedite the actual agenda because people are clocking onto it, and as more and more people are reading up about it and recognizing what they're doing, there are a lot more people standing up, which is causing civil unrest. And actually, that worries me a little because actually this is, I think, what they want us to do. And that's my concern. But they are speeding it up. Like, so when you said the rapidity of it, actually, I think that's really important to watch. So sometimes we can get so involved and we can be sort of sat there kind of like watching everything and taking it all on board. But like we said, there is always like a hidden agenda. There's always a back doorway.
I think that's the thing. I think when you start looking and you start researching and you go down the rabbit holes, you end up...
And the Warren.
You end up in a warren.
Absolutely.
You end up in a warren. But when you look and you actually apply it and you look at what's been happening across Europe, and you look at the influence that the WEF has had over European leaders, and let's face it, they set themselves up, the WEF, as a think tank, and they come up with ideas. But these ideas are what is influencing our politicians in terms of what they're implementing on the ground. And I think across Europe, you're seeing it in France. There's a rejection in France. You've seen a turn away from Macron. In Romania, in Holland, in Germany, in Ireland. There's a huge amount of people turning around and going, hang on a minute, we're rejecting the path on which you as a government are taking us on. Italy as well. Let's not forget Italy. So there's a huge rejection.
It's things like this, isn't it?
Exactly.
It's things like the very fact that they're taking money away from our victims who have suffered, and yet they are literally then sort of taking that money and then handing it somewhere else.
I think they're accelerating. I think they understand the WF and whilst it may sound conspiratorial, they've been very open in what they've been saying. It's all out there. If you go and have a look, we'll do something on it later. Look at it in a little bit more detail in another podcast. But what they're actually doing is that they're trying to implement these things before they all get ousted, because then once they've got everything implemented, then there's no need for elections, because they will have in place the systems and the globalization, centralization of power that they want. That's what it looks like to me, is the path in which they're going, and that's why it's accelerated.
No compassion. There is no, heartfelt resolve for them, that they do not want to bring something to their lives that could actually just help them a little bit after all the stress and the duress of the abuse that they've gone through.
Why did they get into politics if it wasn't to help people? And the Labour parliamentarians, most of them would say that they got into Parliament to help the victims and those without a voice.
Then they become elite, and then they become WEF puppets.
Yeah.
Why are we not sort of engaging in this? Why are people not understanding what a WEF puppet actually is and how serious that is? Because it's impacting every single area in our life. And if it's money that's going to people like victims, they would rather take that away and they'd give it to, other areas.
The WEF is set up to, and they have stakeholders, they have partners who are the global corporations, Unilever, IBM, Coca-Cola, all these massive big corporations, and they want to make doing business easier without regulation. So they're the ones that are influencing where they want the money spent.
Which is then BlackRock.
Behind them, because they're the shareholders behind it.
Exactly.
So they're influencing where the money gets spent, and they're choosing not to spend it on the people that matter and give redress to the victims.
Okay, guys, look, thank you very much for watching. I think this is where we stop it now. I feel quite angry. I don't know how you feel.
I'm really angry with what they've done.
If anybody has actually suffered abuse and this has affected you, then I'm encouraging you to reach out. We here at the Land of Saints and Sinners will be open to discuss anything with you, and if we can help you in any way, then we will. You can find us on TikTok, you can find us on X and YouTube.